So I'm an only child, and I'm a daughter of immigrants, and I think maybe because my parents are immigrants and also because I'm an only child, we're just extraordinarily tight. And so my dad was my best friend growing up and my biggest cheerleader. And so the worst thing I could ever imagine was losing my father. There's just like, I would say, God, anything but my dad. And then the second worst thing I could imagine was not being able to have, not having a family of my own. And then the third worst thing I could imagine was being married and then having to get divorced, because both of my parents had been divorced before they met each other. Well, in 2021, after a very idyllic life, all three of those things happened. But on top of that, I also lost the only identity I had left other than Jesus, which was my career. Now, when you don't have kids and you get married later in life and you're an only child and a daughter of a tiger mother who's Chinese, you tend to value achievement very highly, and your identity becomes very, especially if you're single in the church, because there's really no place for you in the church when you're single and you're like 40. And so you just kind of do the thing where you're most welcome. And for me, that was Republican politics. So I'd spent most of my life in Washington and I had a great career. But I lost everything within about 3 months in 2021. I had my fourth miscarriage with what was soon to be my ex-husband, which I didn't know at the time. I lost my biggest paying client. Ended up having to move out of our beautiful home on the beach in San Diego because I was the main breadwinner. And my mother, actually both my parents almost died. My mother ended up going into a surgery that was supposed to be very small and ended up being a 9-hour, very horrific surgery for her that took months to recover from. And my father fell and broke his back and then later on passed away. And it was truly one of the worst seasons of my life. And I've never been dramatic about things. I kind of just, because life was good, generally speaking. But I remember one moment right after I had my fourth miscarriage in 23 months, at the age of, I guess I was 43. I said, Lord, if I'm not here anymore, that's okay. Like, you can take me home now. Like, I wasn't suicidal or anything weird, but I just didn't really understand what the purpose was of living on this earth with this much misery and this compressed of a season. And my husband ended up disappearing for about 40 days and ended up wanting to be divorced in the middle of all of this. And I didn't know where to go, and I heard the Lord audibly say, go home. And I hadn't lived at home since I was 18 years old. I'd been living in D.C. and all over the world and kind of London. I did a whole jet-setting thing. And I said, home. And he said, yeah, home. Home. And I said, okay. And I packed up what was left of our marital, whatever, my half of it all, and I drove home 3 days later. And then my dad proceeded to begin dying. And he'd really been really sick. He'd been on a steady decline, but I had the incredible privilege of being my dad's daughter again, which, you don't really get to do that in life very often because most people aren't getting divorced and moving home at the age of 43. So it was a remarkable time. And in that time, my dad had a lot of bitterness and he'd never really fully given his life to the Lord. And I just had this incredible opportunity to get a lot of inner healing myself. And I was able to share that with him. And about 6 months before he died, he forgave his ex-wife, which was like the last thing that kept him from really knowing the Lord fully. And I remember saying that night, Lord, if he goes home tonight, that's okay. Because that's all that matters. My dad will be in heaven. And at his funeral, 6 months later, when he was in the hospital, right before he died, right when he was dying, I had such a sense of peace because of all the forgiveness that had transpired. And I was singing worship songs over him as he was dying and holding his hand. And I felt the presence of the Lord so strongly, but I thought maybe I'm the only one that feels this way in here. And at my dad's funeral, our dear family friend who worked at the hospital, who was in the room when he was dying, he'd code blued, and so there were like 30 people in the room. Everyone's trying to, they have to be there for 40 minutes or something before they can declare him dead. I guess there were these Filipino Catholic nurses in the room that were super faithful. And they told, and I heard this story at his funeral. Our dear family friend got up and spoke about my dad and being in that room at the end. And he said that these female nurses, these Filipino Catholic nurses, had actually seen angels all in the room as I was singing. And I knew that God had been there, and I knew that God's presence was real. But I didn't know about the angels, like that was real. And everyone else was blessed by it. And so I told my pastor, who's like my spiritual dad who came up to do the funeral, I said, when you go up and talk about my dad, I want you to spend most of your time just sharing the gospel. Because I waited my whole life to see my dad know the Lord, and I don't want anyone else to be in that position. And in that funeral home of there was probably 100 people at my dad's funeral. He was 86, so all his friends had pretty much died, at that point. And in this room of 100 people, 25 people raised their hands and gave their lives to the Lord. Which, as an evangelist, as somebody who loves Jesus and just wants him to be known, was the greatest gift my dad could have left me. And so all the things that I had gone through that led me to that point of going home, none of which would have happened if I'd become a mother, if I had stayed married to that person, if I hadn't lost my home in San Diego, if I hadn't lost my career and just had time to come home. None of it would have happened in those 25 people. Who knows how the Lord would have met him. And so I'm so grateful to God for that season in my life where I was able to experience the fullness of his love and this weaving of his story to bring all things to good.
Tell everyone about your book and a different, or what you're doing now.
Yeah.
I know that you're.
As I cry, I'm like, yeah. Well, the best part of my life is, again, that I just got married to the most incredible man in the world.
He's
God's
pretty incredible.
redemption is incredible. And like your ring, my husband designed my ring with a dear friend of his who thankfully is a diamond broker, which is why I have the largest ring I've ever seen in my life. And he designed it. When he gave it to me, I was like, is this a joke? And the waitress was like, I think somebody could ice skate across it. And I was like, I think you're right. Because, when God restores, okay, this is I don't usually tell people this, but you guys are friends now. We spent all night together. So the Lord told me he was going to restore me at least tenfold in every way when I met my husband. And I'm kind of greedy. I'm like, well, how about 1,000-fold? But okay, I'll take 10. But he said 10 for a reason. I didn't know what he was kind of going towards. And this is not bragging on my husband or me, but on how specific the Lord is. The appraisal for my ring was exactly to the number, 10 times what the worth was for the appraisal of my ex-husband's ring. I know, I hate saying this. I have to be careful in what company I say that in. But I'm like, God actually told me that to show me yet again that he was in charge of that love story, right? So anyway, so the best thing I have now going on is that I get to be a wife to somebody who truly loves me. And literally every time I go on TV, which is all the time, I'm always on TV talking to him, especially yesterday. It was such an honor to be on TV talking about the hostages being released and President Trump's leadership and then talk about why we need federal troops in Portland. But anyway, my husband, every time I go on, he says the same thing. He watches every hit and he says, be you. God has created you to speak truth. Be you, be bold, be you. And I just love it. So that's the best thing. Aside from that, 2 years ago, I wrote a book that not many people read, but you guys were so supportive of, called Politics for People Who Hate Politics, How to Engage Without Losing Your Friends or Selling Your Soul. Because I believe that when we show up in politics and we're passionate about things, we need to show up not only fully in the truth of God, but also in the full character of Christ. And I found that in most of my career, I was really good at the truth part, but I was kind of a jerk. And I was very judgmental of people I disagreed with. And I believed that somehow, if you were wrong, you were a bad person. There was this part of me that was very judgmental. I still think that people on the other side of the aisle are wrong. I'm not going to lie. But I feel like God has given me a new lens through which to see and understand that everyone has different experiences in life. And so they arrive at different policy positions because of those experiences. And those are valid, and that's their story. And it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict and lead our nation in the direction it needs to go. And over the course of 25 years of making a lot of mistakes in politics, God brought this book out. And I think it's more relevant now than ever in light of what's happened to Charlie and all the other things that are going on with political violence. So it's a lot of fun, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.